If war breaks out with China, the United States has one mission: get boots on the ground fast and expand its presence before Beijing can stop it. But China has spent years preparing to keep America out, developing weapons and tactics designed to block any invasion force before it even reaches the shore. Now, the US has an answer: the Amphibious Combat Vehicle, or ACV, a fast, heavily armored transport built to get Marines from ship to shore under fire. On paper, it sounds like a game changer, but in reality, let's just say not everyone is impressed. So what exactly does the ACV bring to the table? Is it really the future of amphibious warfare, or is the US military betting on the wrong ride? Let's dive into the battlefield of the future and find out. The ACV can carry 13 troops and 3 crew, along with ammunition and supplies to last for 2 days. It has firepower with a 30mm cannon as its primary weapon. This is the biggest gun directly supporting Marines in the field. To put it into perspective, that gun shoots the same ammunition as the world's most famous tank killer, the A-10 Warthog. There's also a peculiar round it uses, the tungsten Mark 258 discarding sabot. This is basically a high-energy dart that breaks free of its casing upon leaving the gun barrel. And because it's made of tungsten, it's very dense and hard, so it's really good at turning armor into Swiss cheese. How good? Well, the details are naturally classified, but it can supposedly punch through 100mm of armor at about 2/3 of a mile, or 1 kilometer. Basically, unless you're a main battle tank and staring this thing down from the front, you're in trouble. If that wasn't enough, it has other options. Secondary weapons include a 50 caliber machine gun and a grenade launcher. But that's only the attack variant of the ACV, called the ACV-30. There are others. There's the more mobile ACV-P. There's a recovery version, the ACV-R, which will provide maintenance and recovery for vehicles that break down or get stuck. This quality should not be underestimated in its importance. Mechanized units inevitably break down and need repair. The lack of recovery vehicles has plagued Russia in Ukraine, and operating in amphibious conditions is even more challenging. The ACV-R helps to ensure that the US Marine Corps does not become the Russian army, and that's always worth its weight in gold. Finally, there's the ACV-C for command. It has radio and communications equipment that can resist enemy electronic warfare efforts. Because of this, it can operate as a mobile, battalion-level command center, or at least its manufacturer, BAE Systems, says it can. The ACV is fast, with a speed of 65 miles per hour on land and 7 miles per hour in water. It can go far on land, with a range of 325 miles. Interestingly, the ACV has 8 bare wheels instead of tracks, like a traditional vehicle of its kind. Tracked vehicles are usually thought to be better at moving in amphibious environments. However, the ACV has new technologies that the Pentagon thinks have more than mitigated the traditional advantage tracked vehicles had. One of these new features is called inline drive. With this tech, all 4 wheels on each side of the ACV pull the unit at the same time. This is actually similar to how tracked vehicles move around. Meanwhile, the use of wheels instead of tracks makes the vehicle more maneuverable, all while saving on the considerable maintenance that tracked vehicles require. It offers a lot of protection too. It's packed with bolted-on armor plates capable of stopping 50 caliber rounds, and BAE Systems estimates that the ACV's armor is 3 times more effective in protecting its passengers than the vehicles it's meant to replace. Even the seats are designed to protect the Marines sitting in them from blasts. Maybe most importantly, it can move at ranges up to 14 miles in water, which means it can depart from a ship operating safely offshore and get to land. There are 2 thrusters in the back that make it maneuverable in the surf. The ACV was able to handle 9-foot waves during testing with ease, so it can swim in rougher conditions than the vehicles it's set to replace. The ACV's range in water is particularly crucial to the Marine Corps strategy. The brass needs it to operate far from its host. Why does the mothership need to be so far away? Well, it's all about countering China's anti-access area denial (A2AD) strategy. Counter A2AD has been a cornerstone of America's national security strategy since 2018. Why? Well, first you need to look at things from China's point of view. China has been in the midst of a massive military build-up since the late 2000s, but for all the progress it's made, it knows that it still can't defeat the United States in a stand-up fight, so it needs to look at other ways to win. Much like Japan in World War II, China has the benefit of being able to operate close to its home environment, and technology has advanced a long way since then. Through offensive systems like missiles and defensive ones like jammers, it aims to restrict the ability of the US military to operate in the A2AD zone, where casualties can be expected to rapidly balloon. From there, China would hope to exert pressure on the home front to abandon the effort, much as had been the case in the Vietnam and Iraq wars. So the United States needs to find ways to operate in and reduce the A2AD zone, which means rapidly projecting power into the contested area. That's exactly what the US Marines intend to do with a plan called Force Design 2030, and it's a good look on where the ACV fits into the Pentagon's strategy for the Indo-Pacific region. Imagine a fight for Taiwan broke out. There's a problem here because Taiwan is in the most dangerous part of China's A2AD umbrella, being only about 100 miles off the coast of the Chinese mainland. This area is under the guns of thousands of Chinese missiles, which means that it would be extremely dangerous for American surface ships to go there. Meanwhile, ships and aircraft from China's military can easily respond to projections of power in the strait, making the environment that much worse. So how would the US military adapt to such a challenge? One fact is important. A fight for Taiwan would not just encompass the large island. There are many smaller islands around Taiwan, Japan, and the Philippines that would be involved in the fighting. Fortifying these islands and turning them into bastions would pose a big problem for the movement of the Chinese invasion force. Remember that 30mm cannon the ACV is packing? That would come into play here. That tungsten armor-piercing sabot it packs would be really good at chewing up smaller Chinese ships that get close to shore. You know, the kind that land troops. APCs, no match for this bad boy either. And thanks to its ship-to-shore capability, the ACV is an ideal choice for departing surface ships at safer distances and moving on to the island hotspots. Here's how that would work. Landing craft would be launched from a mothership that could be as far as 200 miles out, a safer distance from the enemy missile threat. The landing craft would move through most of the remaining distance and then drop the ACVs near to shore to get the boots on the ground on the beaches. In the May 2023 Tentative Manual for Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations, the Marines describe the objectives it intends the ACV to fulfill in operations like this. Number 1. Deter aggression. Number 2. Set conditions within the theater before armed conflict occurs. Number 3. Swiftly posture to fight within the maritime environment during a joint campaign. In their words, advantageous force posture can be leveraged to disproportionately draw or distract enemy forces or create dilemmas, which enable fleet forces to mitigate risk in a contested environment or seize opportunities elsewhere. Moving on to the islands around Taiwan fits these things pretty well, doesn't it? Preferably, the Marines would want to keep the element of surprise and begin to fortify these islands before the Chinese invasion begins. The Marines would have the benefit of knowing in advance that one was coming. After all, an operation on this scale is not something that the People's Liberation Army would be able to hide. Good luck with your D-Day deception plans in the age of satellite surveillance. The necessary troops and equipment will be spotted for weeks or months beforehand. Once it's determined that an invasion of Taiwan is coming, the Marines would want to rapidly set up their outposts on the target islands, preferably in secret. Fortunately, the ACV has a quiet engine, and unlike its predecessors, it doesn't create a chimney of black smoke when it starts up. The ships of the US Navy would be spotted. It would be much harder for the Chinese to find the ACVs. Let's think about the comparison with the ACV's predecessors for a moment. To further find out why the brass thinks the ACV is such an ideal tool for these operations, it's best to take a brief look at the vehicles that came before it. The US Marine Corps, which would naturally be at the forefront in a fight of this sort, has 400 LAV-25 vehicles and 1,1300 amphibious armored vehicles, AAVs. How would these stack up against an A2AD adversary like China? The LAV-25 can carry a 25mm Bushmaster cannon, which means it's good for fire support once troops get on the ground, but there are many drawbacks. It has thin armor, which means it can't stop much hostile fire beyond standard rifle rounds. It can also only carry 6 troops and can't move in deep waters or rough surf, so it's not a vehicle that will be able to take the islands around Taiwan. It would need to get there after bases have already been set up, which means it's not the most effective choice for the most intense phase of a beach operation, landing. The AAV, on the other hand, is better at moving around in water than the LAV-25. It was designed to move over long distances in rough surf, an ability called ship-to-shore, so it can make the necessary moves on the islands. Unfortunately, these vehicles have a lot of drawbacks. They are 20 miles per hour slower than the ACV on land, which means they aren't as good at taking space quickly. More importantly, they lack strong protection against mines since their underbellies are particularly soft. Mines have proven to be one of Russia's best assets in Ukraine, and China would certainly use them as part of its overall anti-access area denial strategy. Sending amphibious vehicles that lack good mine protection to contested shores in the Indo-Pacific is tantamount to sending some service members to certain death. The AAV is also comparatively lacking in fire support. It can carry only a 50 caliber machine gun and a Mark 19 grenade launcher. This was good enough in campaigns against terrorists and insurgents, but against a near-peer adversary like China, it simply does not provide enough firepower that the United States would need to expand its presence on shore. To make matters worse, the weapons aren't stabilized, so the AAV needs to stop to ensure accurate fire, and that's as good as asking to get hit. Because the AAV is so old, it has another problem. Its communications equipment would likely prove inadequate in the face of modern electronic warfare. With jammers popping up all over the place these days, it's unlikely that the AAV would be up to the task in a contested environment against a near-peer adversary. And there was another incident that revealed the AAV's awkward place in today's military. Unfortunately, one of them sank during an exercise off Camp Pendleton, California in July 2020. 8 Marines and a Navy corpsman died. The entire fleet of AAVs was forbidden to do any water exercises for 10 months in the wake of the tragedy. The incident revealed a harsh truth. The current amphibious vehicles are over 50 years old. In other words, they were made at a time when the United States was focused on containing communism in Europe and Asia. These were primarily land wars, not the type of naval confrontation akin to the Pacific Theater in World War II that the United States would face against China. That's why the US Marine Corps asked for a replacement to the AAV as early as 1996. That year it made a proposal to General Dynamics Land Systems for a new vehicle. The new amphibious vehicle needed to carry a full squad, moving from ship to shore, and have more firepower than the AAV. However, the proposal was too far ahead of its time. The eventual product, called the Expeditionary Fighting Vehicle (EFV), was cancelled in 2011 as the US military continued to focus on its war on terror. The cancellation proved to be badly timed. Only a few years later, China would begin its island-building campaign and see the flowering of its A2AD tools. It looked like the United States would be stuck with its antiquated AAVs, but the cancellation of the EFV was not the end of the story. There's another wrinkle. Fortunately, the United States wasn't entirely on the back foot. The ACV was also conceived at this time. The Marines meant it to be a smaller companion to the larger EFV, and this program was never cancelled. The brass settled on a design by an Italian company called Iveco Defense Vehicles. The design went back to 1999 when the Brazilian army was toying with it. The design was upgraded in 2010 for the Italians, and in 2018, the Marines announced it as their pick to replace the AAV, awarding a $198 million contract for the first 30 of them. But Iveco had a problem because it also produced armored vehicles for China and Russia. Can anyone say awkward? Maybe unsurprisingly, Iveco sold the rights to produce the vehicle to Britain's BAE Systems. There's another company involved, Norway's Kongsberg Gruppen, the same company behind the NASAMS air defense system and other cool stuff. They developed the turret hosting that big 30mm gun. It's unmanned. That matters more than you think. Because it's unmanned, it shaves weight and size off the ACV's profile. The savings make it faster and more stable in the water, all while allowing more comfortable room for the troops it's carrying inside. The ACV went into full production in 2020 in York, Pennsylvania, at a rate of 80 per year. For the Marines, it's a badly needed upgrade in a deteriorating threat environment, or so they say. The proof is in the performance. How has it performed in the field so far? As fate would have it, some have already been deployed to Okinawa, in exactly the environment the US military would want to use them in, so there's good data to reference. Reception hasn't been uniformly positive though. Sources in the Pentagon have stated that the early testing revealed survivability issues, so maybe that talk about it being 3 times as protective as the old AAV wasn't entirely accurate. We can't be sure though because the details are classified. The US Naval Institute has also questioned the Marine Corps' emphasis on the ACV's 65 mph land speed. They argue that movement in water matters the most for this thing's mission, and were not impressed by its 7 mph performance, when the old Higgins boats from World War II could move through water at speeds between 10 and 13 mph. Maybe this doesn't sound like much, but when you need to take space quickly, time is of the essence. USNI also worried that the ACV came with a big trade-off. It can only transport 13 troops, while the old AAV could transport 21 at a time, which substantially increases the logistical burden to the Marines. 35 ACVs would be needed to transport 3 standard rifle companies of 150 Marines to shore, compared to only 22 AAVs. USNI warned that the Marines were not the Army and that the design of the ACV, which seems to optimize use with the Abrams tank, was flawed because tanks are rarely used in these operations. Also, remember those seats designed to shield Marines from blasts? Well, the Marines who have ridden in the ACV so far have often complained that they're uncomfortable, but that's probably better than being thrown upward from a blast and breaking your neck on the vehicle's ceiling. Some Marines also have a problem with the ACVC. This vehicle is supposed to allow them to set up an independent and self-sustaining battalion-level command on an island that might well be surrounded by the enemy. However, 2023 reporting found that the ACVC did not adequately fulfill that mission. The reason? It lacked the secure communications and data nets it would need to communicate with the ships offshore. Newer versions and upgrades have reportedly fixed these issues. There have also been a few accidents. In July 2022, 2 ACVs rolled over and became disabled in the water. Fortunately, no one was injured, but it did cause the Marines to temporarily suspend ACV waterborne operations. In December 2023, 1 ACV rolled during a nighttime training exercise. 1 Marine was killed and a further 14 injured. These incidents required the Marines to establish new training procedures for the ACV, as they found that the vehicles themselves were not to blame. However, since the ACV has a higher center of gravity and is faster than the old AAV, there will be a greater chance for it to roll over, so it's not entirely the fault of inadequate training procedures. But it's hardly all bad news. The 30mm cannon was found to have an impressive 91% accuracy rating when the ACV was stationary. Even more impressively, it had a 97% accuracy rating when the vehicle was on the move. The Marines had an initial goal to order 1,100 ACVs by 2030, but has since reduced this order to 632 of them for $250 million. Maybe more controversially and contradicting the USNI's 2019 reporting, the Marines intend to ditch Abrams tanks and tubed artillery in its posture for 2030. The Marines are confident that their service members will get used to the new vehicle at a time where it will be most needed. With officials in Washington fearing an invasion of Taiwan as early as 2027, the Marine brass is probably thankful that the program wasn't cancelled alongside the EFE in what proved to be a short-sighted move in 2011. What do you think about the ACV? Will it prove to be a vital component of US Navy and Marine Corps strategy in the Indo-Pacific? Or is it still not ready for a prime time that's coming fast? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Also make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more military analysis from military experts. Now go and check out The US Can Destroy All of China with Only B-21s, or click this other video instead.